Yes, the next tip is a really, really cool one. I'll just do, the next tip is, let's hop back to the screen, we can do that. So the next tip is doing file new set. I can't click and talk. Right, perfect. So the next tip is to use tools to write in key. Now I'm going to hop back to me. I'll keep things more, hopping backwards and forwards, I won't do it too much, but I'll do it properly. Right. So the next tip is all about writing in key. So one of the biggest questions people ask me when they're writing music is, how do I write stuff in a particular key? Because chances are most of you don't know what notes go in what particular scale, what particular key. And personally, I have no idea. You could say F major or B pentatonic, something or other, and I wouldn't know what notes on the keyboard correspond to that particular scale. But that doesn't mean I can't write in that particular scale, because there are loads of tools built into your DAW that can solve this problem for you. Because if you think about it, the whole idea of playing certain notes in a certain scale isn't really creative, it's just a technical detail that you can solve by using tools. So by far the best way to do it, I find, unless you have an Ableton Push or one of the control keyboards that has kind of stuff to do it for you, you can use a MIDI effect called Velocity. Again, it's a MIDI effect called Velocity in Ableton. There'll be equivalents in other DAWs too. If I just hop back to my screen, I can show you that. So we're in Ableton here, and I will get a simple sound playing. So let's keep it as simple as possible with an Ableton operator. Click. And bring down the level a touch, and we'll do a lovely little saw wave. Do like a saw wave. Perfect. So have a little saw wave here, and as I press notes on the keyboard, it lets me press any note at all, which isn't good if I want to write in a particular scale, in a particular key, because I personally don't know what notes are in what scale. So what I can do is use a MIDI effect. So I go MIDI effects, and then not velocity, I said the wrong word there, not MIDI effects, scale, there you go. MIDI effects scale, and yes, we're looking at the screen, MIDI effects scale. And in fact, the way this works is the MIDI effect scale takes notes on the keyboard and then shifts it into the note that you want it to be, which it just kind of works. Let me give you a more practical example. So if I change the scale preset to, say, C major, and then take off the hot swap, and then I change the bass to, say, let's go F, then because I chose the C major scale MIDI effect, and then I chose bass F, then what this MIDI effect will do is shift any note I press on the keyboard into the scale F major, which is really cool because it means I can drop my fingers on the keyboard, probably with more trial and error thought and stuff. Literally, whatever notes I press on the keyboard now will be in F major, because I've chosen the bass F and the C major preset in scale. So if you are struggling with writing stuff in key, you don't have to learn music theory. Now, I always recommend learn music theory if you've got the time and you enjoy it. But if you don't enjoy it, maybe your brain's not wired to learn music theory, or maybe it's just not your favorite thing in the world, you just want to go down with making music, have a play around with these MIDI effects, because yeah, it solves all your problems. And in fact, some of the biggest guys in the world, if you've heard of Glitch Mob, literally some of the biggest music producers in the world, even not even just EDM, Glitch Mob, some of the main guys in that don't have any idea about music theory. I mean, they write these amazing cinematic, musical, almost like pieces of music, not even just dance music, and they don't even know what notes go in what scale. They just use these MIDI effects to shift it for you. So literally now I can just use any note on the keyboard, drop my fingers, and that'll be in that particular scale. And then also, as a bit of a bonus, there are other bits of software that can create interesting chords for you. So if you're struggling to create interesting emotional chords, I mean, you can always do it by trial and error, just by, say, using a MIDI effect and dropping your fingers on the keyboard till it sounds cool. And that's certainly a way of working that lots of guys use. There are bits of software you can use to generate interesting chords. So for example, my favorite is going to be the Complete Control, I think it is. Yeah, the Complete Control plugin. Yeah, still showing my screen. So yeah, if I grab, for some reason, the Complete Control thing, you need to use an instrument rack. It's not available as a normal plugin. So if I find a Complete Control VST, do a click, and give it a second to load, and then move it back onto the correct part of the screen. Pretty sure that's get made first with the Byzantine scale. Yeah, there's some really, that's a really good point. There's some really interesting scales beyond your normal major and minor scales. I don't want to show you that actually, because it's just so much fun, can't not show you. So I'll just grab a serum, there you go, we all love serum. Serum, just get a simple basic shapes, and the square. So your normal scales for reference would be like your major and your minor scales. I suppose there's some Western bias in that, but it does tend to be the way that at least most music producers tend to at least look at the world. So you've got your major and minor scales, your normal like quote unquote normal sounding scales, but there's also these really fun ones like your Byzantine ones. For me personally, I love the major pentatonics and the minor gypsy scales. So the major pentatonics, it's kind of all happy and floaty and cloud and bubbly. That's how I tend to imagine it. So do play around with the crazy scales. For reference, you can see you do have your kind of crazy scales like major pentatonic scale presets as MIDI effects too. But yeah, you can get some pretty cool scales actually, which it can be a great way of standing out. So for example, your minor gypsy scale, I'm just using my Ableton Push here, gives it kind of a gypsy sort of weird quirky vibe, which is a lot of fun. But yeah, got distracted with scales there, but no, that's all fun. It's distractions are good. So yeah, what I've shown you is in Complete Control. What you can do is if I load up a sound, it can basically generate really crazy interesting chords for you, so you don't have to learn all the crazy music theory. If I go to Serum, because we all like some Serum, I'll do another square wave. I do love square waves. It's just what I like doing right now. So in the Smart Play bit in Complete Control, what you can do is take a single note on the keyboard and play a really cool chord. So I can go to just Complete Control and then Scale, toggle it on, and then go to Chord Set Mode, and then choose maybe, I don't know, major 4, G. And now if you see me on the camera, so you can see that I'm not cheating here, so there's no cheating happening. If I press one note on the keyboard, which you might be able to see, might not, but one note on the keyboard plays a full chord. And that's all coming from back to the screen, back to the screen, back to the screen. And that all comes from Complete Control, where it takes each note on the keyboard and generates a really interesting chord, which I love because personally, I mean, I can make really cool chord progressions by trial and error, but I don't know what intervals generally sound good with other intervals, but I can choose this chord set mode and in no time at all have an amazing emotional chord progression. In fact, that's how I made the chord progression for this guy, which I'll show you as I'm talking. Like, yeah. So yeah, that's how I made this chord progression. Which sounds lovely, but yeah, cool. That is chords and a cool little trick. So yeah, use the tools in your DAW to kind of quote unquote cheat music theory. Perfect, awesome. So yeah, the next tip is, oh yeah, feel free to ask questions by the way, or if I'm explaining everything so brilliantly, I suppose you don't need questions, but awesome. Yeah, the next tip is, yeah, if I look over here, that's me looking at the order of tips, and over here is the chat.